Welcome everyone to a new episode of Confident Leadership in Color. Today I have a new guest with me. This guest is someone I have heard a lot of great things about before. You know, those people that you get their names and they keep coming up again and again in a really good way. And that is Linda, actually. She has built an impressive career within IT service management, holding senior roles such as director of IT for one of the largest privately held broadband providers in the US. And later on, she has been working as vice president of technology operations at Curo Financial Technologies. These days, she combines her experience as a program delivery director at one company and also running her own consultancy business on the side. What really caught my attention when people were speaking about Linda, it was how she shows up. The words that came up again and again were authentic and honest, and someone who gives real grounded advice, who leads with confidence. So a couple of weeks ago, I finally had the chance to meet Linda in person, and our short catch up turned out into a long, rich conversation that could easily have gone 4 hours. But so today, I'm actually really genuinely thrilled to have you here on the show, Linda, and pick up where we left off. Welcome to the show, Linda Lenox.
Thank you so much. That's an incredible introduction. I am truly honored. Thank you so very much. And if I have some words to offer people that they want to hear, then great. So all you can do is just, as you said, show up and be authentic. So you get it honestly and from the heart.
Yeah, that was actually, we came into that subject a lot during our conversation based on things that has happened through our lives, our careers. And we ended up in some way like, oh, I wish I had known that from the start, or
Yes.
if I could give an advice to someone that is entering workspace today, what would that be, etc. So we were coming into that subject. So we thought that maybe that can be a good topic for today. Like, see how can we operate without fear, actually, and what that will bring into an organization.
Yes, so that turned into a great topic, and we just morphed into it just organically through the conversation that we were having. And in fact, after we got off the call, I found myself writing an article about it because it was we almost had an aha moment while we were chatting, and we were talking about courage and fear. And we were talking about how, courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is, your ability to do the right thing, even when there is fear. And then we morphed into, well, what if we worked in an environment where there was no fear? What would that be like? And that was when I kind of had my aha moment that, hey, I actually did get there. And, as we go through challenging times with things like layoffs and the fear of speaking up in case you find yourself on the wrong side of somebody and it could cost you your job or that promotion or that raise or so people tend to hold back. But you reach a point in your career, if you're really, really blessed and lucky, where you don't have to be afraid anymore. The kids are grown, they're through college, your mortgage is paid off, you could retire if you wanted to. And all of a sudden, you find yourself with this almost like explosion of creativity and energy because you're not afraid anymore. And it made me realize, do we, should we, and could we coach leaders to set up a culture, their environment without fear? Why do we have to lead from fear? It was quite the aha moment.
Definitely, and I think that one of the reason, like I started my company in that sense, it was because I maybe not showing all of my creativity at where I was at that point. And something was holding me back in that sense. So it's finding that right environment. There has been so much research on this area in the sense of like maybe the most it's a common one or spoken about is it's Google Aristotle research, like creating this psychological safe environment. And in my world, then fear doesn't exist in that sense, not in a bad way, or it can exist there, but it's more, it's a control, then it's okay to have
Mhm.
fear, but we help each other in some way. That is how I translate fear in that kind of environment.
And that's where I got to, doing some more thinking, because we talk about, setting up these environments without fear where people are free to experiment, right? To take risks and experiment. We talk about that a lot in IT. And I mean, there are whole frameworks like SRE that speak to it, where, we want people to innovate, to take risks, to try new things. Are we saying the words, or are we truly doing those things? Because I've seen environments where those words are said, but then if somebody makes a mistake, then we find ourselves in things like retros after some kind of an incident has occurred because somebody did take a risk, or, for whatever reason. And there will be actual verbal threats made about people's employment. If this ever happens again, I'm firing everybody. I mean, I have literally heard those words said. And then what did that do to everybody, right? So you were getting this message that you're, innovate, take risks, do the right thing for the right reasons, accept that, failure is a part of growing. And we say these things. And then all it takes is for a senior leader who is perhaps afraid himself to undo all of that. And then we have people, they go silent, they hunker down. We're saying one thing, but we're doing something else. And, and we're really costing our companies and ourselves that power of innovation and creativity. We drive people away, people who have choices, when they feel like they're in an environment like that. Why would they stay if they have choices? So, and we see it with layoffs too. A layoff has gone through, even for, those people who successfully made it through the layoff. They want to be quiet, be silent, not be seen. Because if you don't notice me, well, then maybe the next time the Grim Reaper goes through for another layoff, you won't notice me. And, we have a lot of fear in the workplace, and it harms us. But if you can free yourself of that fear, I think it's like I said, there's almost like an explosion of creativity that you experience. And, personally, I've always been noticed for being a little outspoken, shocking, I know, but, courageous, right? And I never looked at it as being courageous. I looked at it more as being authentic. It's how do we translate that out further? And how do we train our leaders, our rising leaders, the power and the importance of truly having environments without fear?
I think we both maybe have good examples of people that has meant a lot to us, that has created that kind of environment. I have one manager, he was really good in the sense of that every time everything went good, so to say, he was always there cheering on, and never
Yes.
taking credit for anything in that sense. He was just cheering on. This is really good for the team, for you, etc. Just do it, continue. And then when something went not so good, it failed for some reason, he was always the one that was standing in front of it.
Right.
And took that hit that, okay, it was on my watch, no worries, I take it on me, and more like helping us others to pick
Right.
up again. And more encouraging that, good, you took a decision, you did it, you tested it out, perfect. I think that was a perfect example of someone that's create this kind of things. Have you
Oh,
any
yes.
or managers that you have been working with, or
Oh,
someone?
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when I was a very new manager, the executive IT director that I reported up to, fantastic man, a real role model. And he said to me one day, he said, a manager's role is to be a dam. and you let all of the good things go through
Mm,
and the bad stops with me. And that stayed with me. I mean, that conversation took place over 25 years ago,
mm,
and that stayed with me. And, sometimes you hear people say, oh, this manager, in this case, me, they're always protecting their people. Well, yes, I do. You know
mm,
what? Because that's my job.
yeah.
That doesn't mean I don't hold my people accountable,
Mm.
but yes, it's my job to protect my people. And that was, like I said, it was just a offhand comment that he made, and he probably doesn't realize that's how impactful that one sentence was. That is so true.
So
So
when you are creating this kind of environment, one part is then, so to say, to protect the team and so. But is there anything else that you are really focusing on as a leader to be able to create that kind of psychological safety environment?
I think honesty, and building the trust,
Mm,
because you can say the words. It's, kind of the examples that I gave earlier. You can say the words, but if you're not backing those words up with actions, then the words mean nothing. So you have to build that trust. So it's going back again to being authentic, being honest, being transparent, being that safe place for somebody to be able to speak with you honestly, regardless of whether it is an idea or perhaps something that they have tried that didn't work out, and there's either going to be an impact or there has been an impact. But being that safe place where they can be honest with you, know that they will be thanked for their honesty and they won't be punished for that honesty. And it's only over time that you have to be consistently that way in order to be able to set that kind of environment. And an environment like that can be destroyed very quickly. So you've got to be honest and transparent. Now, again, that doesn't mean that you don't hold people accountable. I mean, if somebody kind of colored outside the lines a little bit with whatever it was that they were experimenting with, and there wasn't a good reason for doing it. For example, maybe doing it in the production environment, or perhaps doing it outside of a maintenance window. They made a choice to do something that we had very good guardrails around for not doing. Then it's a different conversation. So it's being that safe place doesn't mean that you're also not holding people accountable. So again, that comes to consistency too.
I recently had actually a conversation with someone in an organization where something had gone not so well. We were discussing how, so to say, how should we give that feedback in a constructive way. Still, there need to be a different type of action going forward and from that person. When we sat down and started discussion, we started like, okay, can you explain it from your angle? What has now happened? Didn't need to say anything because that person had realized that, oh, I did something
Yes.
wrong here actually. And now reflecting back, that was not so good. That was like the easiest conversation in one way because I just could ask, okay, so if something
Yes.
happens again, what would you do then, so to say? And that person already had answers. He already knew what problem it was and why,
Mhm.
what had caused it. And I think that is people already know what's has gone bad, blaming themselves
Yes.
or so. And I think the reaction I got afterwards from that person, that feedback was like, wow, I didn't expect it like that. I was so worried going into this conversation,
Yes.
but I'm relieved now. Like
Right.
you
Yeah.
didn't hit me. So
No, you removed the fear.
yeah, exactly. And I think that it's so easy in one way to do it. And later on it like I really want to change this now. I really want to work on this one. And that person was so boosted by it instead.
Hmm.
And I
Oh,
think that's it's a turning point that for me
yes.
I realized that how important it is to not go in with a judgment in that sense.
Yes. Yeah, the my stock question, and people usually chuckle because they've heard me say it so many times, is can you help me understand why we did X
Mm,
and or why we handled it this way?
Mm.
And then by explaining it to you, even if at that point they don't realize that they had kind of gone sideways, by explaining it, they will often come to that conclusion by themselves. And then you can follow it up with, well, how could we handle this differently next time? And then you can come to an agreement.
Yeah.
And I think that's fair, because if you want people to innovate and try new things, then we have to be willing to accept there's a risk associated with that.
Mm.
And we can't punish if the risk is realized, right? Where things didn't go quite according to what the plan or the hopes were.
Definitely, and I think that being in an environment like IT that is constantly changing and
Oh, yes.
it's required to be changed all the time. It means that
Mhm.
we are doing stuff that has sometimes never been done in the company or such before. So it means that we need to think differently what we had done in the past, so to say, and that means that we need to try out things.
And and we owe it to our people to have the right kind of guardrails in place,
Mm.
you know, with things like have fun in the dev environment, do experiment in the dev environment, don't check code into prod without going through the proper procedures. Why would we do that?
Yeah.
You know, so that's, again, that can be a, can you help me understand, you know, why you did it that way? And then sometimes it would be like, well, it was just a small fix and I thought da 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 da. And then, well, what would we do differently now? What did we learn from that? Let's perhaps
Yeah.
agree that we don't do that.
Yeah. No, but then we also have tested our processes in one way, so to say.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes it does lend itself to great discussions if something does go awry like that. And then you find you didn't have a good process in place.
Mm.
It could be a learning for the team that does, you know, with like IT service management. It can be a learning there, like, oh, it wasn't the employee necessarily who made a mistake.
Mm.
It was, we didn't have the right checks and balances in place for that employee to follow. And it, you know, so like letting blame roll downhill is wrong. And again, erodes the trust. And
Mm.
you've built an environment of fear. But being that dam then, and when you realize, okay, we kind of let this employee down, we'll make the bad stuff stops with me and just the good stuff goes forward.
Mm.
And so, and then I think that's where also being authentic and honest with that employee, because you could play the blame game in that kind of a situation. But what if you turn it around and say, huh, okay, well, work with us. What are your ideas for a different process so that something like this doesn't happen to somebody else?
Mm.
And engage, you know, clearly we had a gap here, we being the operative word, we had a gap here. What can we do so that we can make this better and still turn it into a learning?
Definitely, and then it becomes a team effort in some way, and a team way of doing it. So learning together, and hopefully
Mhm.
no one else will do the same failure if we take it like that.
Understanding the why, I think, is incredibly important, because I think all too often you have poor leaders or fearful leaders who won't take the time and effort to
Mm.
understand the why. They will just point the finger and the blame.
Mm.
And I've seen, you know, post-incident reviews, retros go two different ways. One is when the environment is set that there is no finger pointing, there is no blaming. We are going to pool our mental resources and our experiences here, and we will figure out what the root cause of this issue was. And we are going to collectively put things in place so that these things don't happen again. And you open up that if you're walking the talk and you open that up honestly, the creativity that comes out of that kind of a meeting, the projects that it can spawn, the processes that it can spawn, it's, you know, it's very powerful. But if you have a post-incident review that is, we want to find who can we blame for this,
Mm.
and everybody starts pointing fingers at everybody else because now everybody's afraid.
Mm.
And then there's people aren't going to speak up and give you their best and give you their ideas, especially if that idea that thought could result in the fingers pointing back at them. They're just going to be quiet and hunker down. And so, and I've seen them go both ways, but the blameless post-incident review is an incredibly powerful tool. And I think it also helps grow respect for the leaders responsible for putting such an environment together too. I think it grows loyalty and respect and that willingness to speak up.
I definitely agree. And feel that the more stressed the organization is, as you pointed out earlier, if we are going through a reduction period or
Right.
anything else, it's like really stressing and pressing on. At that point, everyone in the organization and higher you go in the hierarchy, they are more and more stressed in that sense.
Yes.
And I feel like that causes that taking jump to conclusions so many times. Like, okay, that's why I blame you, because I'm jumping into a conclusion. I need to find the answer fast now.
And I think sometimes we forget that leaders, even leaders at the very senior level, can also be operating out of fear. So, that is when, you've got a leader who is perhaps afraid for their future or their department's future, and something goes awry, and they're far more quick to assign blame or to have a scapegoat, so that, because everybody has a boss, right? So that they can say, oh, yes, this thing, this outage, this whatever happened, and I got to the bottom of it, and that culprit has been, put on a performance plan or written up or whatever that looks like, but out of fear. And perhaps that leader would have not operated in that way if that leader also wasn't afraid. And that's where we see that fear and how destructive it is to a company, because the company is only as good as the employees. But we lose trust, we lose our culture, we lose our innovation, we lose our willingness to take risks. And oftentimes we lose our best people too, because they have choices.
Exactly. So if we would turn it around a bit, like if we would give that, what is a good way of really fostering that? We have mentioned a few already, but have you been thinking about this? If we say that from a board perspective, like higher management, how can we, from a higher management perspective, support the organization to really fostering this kind of culture more, with creating a culture where we actually are able to learn from our failures and without being blamed, so to say.
And that can be, I think, incredibly challenging, because these cultures oftentimes are set from top down. And all it can take is one change in leadership to create a whole different culture that creates chaos and confusion for employees. And I think sometimes that's where courage kind of comes into play. It takes courageous conversations going up the chain, recognizing that there's inherent risk in doing that. And so it's, that leader that I mentioned to you, that executive director of IT that I worked for, I have no doubt whatsoever that he had courageous conversations going up the chain, because he was just that person. And I've had my own courageous conversations, and when I've shared with my peers what I had said, there's been a couple of times when the response I got was, well, Linda, it's been nice knowing you. But I feel like more often than not, the honesty and the courageous conversation were well accepted. Not always, because there's been times when I was working for a company that was going through some hard times, and then I had a leader who I felt was operating from fear. So he was very much doing the blaming. And when I had a courageous conversation with him, it was not well received. And so he didn't want to hear that what we were doing to people. and what the impact to projects was and the impact to the stability of the IT department was, and that, people were hunkered down in fear instead of being their best. And he didn't want to hear that. But it's one of those things, at the end of the day, you have to be able to look at yourself in the mirror and know that you did the right thing. And even if you hunker down, the stress that you're going to put on yourself, is it worth it? There are other jobs, there are other opportunities out there. There always are. You can't function that way. So as a leader, you've got to be willing to send the bad news and the good news up the chain.
If you are on the highest senior level, so say in the company, you can foster that kind of culture in one way that everyone's opinions matters. Because I think it's also that if you are not hearing, so to say, those challenging parts, just the yes sayers, they probably will not hear the real reason behind it.
Very true.
Yeah. So be able, as the chairman of the board, to really get everyone's different opinions and really have that discussion environment, and then afterwards be able to walk out of that room together with, like, this is our approach now. We didn't, so to say, have the same opinion, everyone, but when we walk out of the room, we have the same path forward, if we take it like that.
And the very best senior leaders make the effort to get to know the people, not just the people that are reporting to them, but they make a point of getting out there in the business and making themselves known and listening to people.
Before we wrap up today, I want to pause for a moment and do a short recap on what we touched upon together, because this conversation has been rich, layered, and full of useful takeaways. One of the threads running through everything Linda and I have been exploring today is that fear shows up everywhere in organizations, and yet we still expect people to innovate, take risks, and speak up. And as we heard so clearly, innovation simply can't thrive where blame is waiting around the corner. I'm taking with me Linda's beautiful reminder that courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is to choose to do the right thing even when fear is present. And imagine what becomes possible when fear stops being the driver altogether. When leaders protect their people and take the heat when things go wrong, and let the praises flow forward when things go right. When honesty, presence, and consistency becomes the real guardrails in a team. I also love the stories we shared about managers who act like dams, letting the good flow freely, and they're holding back the hard things with, of course, with responsibility and care. Because that's what builds trust. And that is what creates the psychological safety that lasts longer than any framework. And that will unleash the creativity and confidence people already carry within them. We're not done. We pick all of that up already in the next episode. So make sure to follow and subscribe to this podcast on the platform you are using. If you like to connect with either Linda or me, you find all the contact details in the show notes. And before you go, I'm hosting a couple of free masterclasses early December. They're designed to help you to move from overthinking to confident action and set yourself up for a strong, grounded start of 2026. I walk you through how to weave the confident framework into your day-to-day leadership in a way that actually feels doable. Make sure to reserve your free seat. All the links are, of course, in the show notes as well. Thank you for listening with an open mind and for leading in your own colors. I see you already in the next episode, where Linda and I continue this conversation right where we left off. Till then, be confident, be you.